Welcome back to my YouTube channel. And yes, we are here for part 2 of our interview with Teesside Live Middlesbrough reporter Craig Johns. And in this part, we're going to be picking his brains on all things Middlesbrough after what has been a great few weeks for the club. We've moved away from the relegation zone. We're now well and truly in the playoff mix. And we'll be hoping to continue that run of form over the next few weeks and months and ultimately mount a playoff challenge. So, Craig, from your point of view, we'll start broadly. What have you made of Middlesbrough's season so far?
It's been a strange one, hasn't it? I think we went in with a lot of hope, obviously, but particularly more because of off the back of last season and the incredible turnaround under Michael Carrick. But 12 new signings, and obviously it was a very different look to the summer transfer window. A lot of younger players arriving, a lot of players coming from foreign leagues as well, needing time to adapt, needing time to gel, and absolutely no doubt. And it's one of them now where it feels we've moved on enough to kind of stop harking back so much to the future and last season. But absolutely no doubt in that they lost a lot of real quality from the squad last season, and for me just emphasizes how big a missed opportunity it was last season in the playoffs. So much had to go into kind of get in there in the first place that by the end of it they kind of just run out of steam. It seemed, picked up some injuries at the wrong time, etc., and just couldn't get over that final hurdle. So yeah, this season you come in and of course you've lost that quality, but so much of it was players on loan. And so in terms of financially, they were only able to recoup just over 10 million from selling Chuba Akpom. But from that, you've got a lot of holes in your squad that you've got to fill. So they could have gone down the loan option again. They could have filled the squad with a lot of loans, and obviously that market can be useful in terms of what we saw them use it for last season, bringing in the likes of Zach Steffen, Ryan Giles, Cameron Archer. You're adding real quality there for ultimately players. I mean, you look at Cameron Archer, for example, I think was it 15 million he went for this summer, and Ryan Giles went for 5. Zach Steffen didn't move in the end because of an injury, but I'm sure he would have gone for good money. And I think I'm sure he's on £80,000 a week, I think is his Manchester City wage. And realistically, Middlesbrough aren't affording those figures while they're still a championship club without parachute payments. So the loan market allows you to bring in that kind of quality without paying the money that they're actually worth. But the problem is when you don't go up, you don't own them. So yeah, the summer transfer window, it needed a rethink from Middlesbrough's point of view, and they kind of went with we'll sign these hidden gems, younger talent, players with high potential, assets, those kind of phrases that have been thrown out about the recruitment strategy. And obviously it wasn't the start we'd all hoped for. Seven league games without a win. It very much looked like what it was ultimately, a young team, a young group of players, largely, not in tune with each other yet. Trying to find a way to gel and connect, and eventually that clicked. And I think a big part of that, cost the first league win against Southampton, came with there was only 3 summer signings in that team, wasn't there? And like 2 of them were Senny Dieng and Lewis O'Brien, who of course had plenty of championship experience prior to joining Boro. And I think that was a real turning point in terms of, and Carrick realised at that point that he needed to go a bit more with for want of a better phrase, tried and tested. And I think that's ultimately helped a lot of the newer players, the boys who arrived in the summer. They've then from there been able to gradually work the way in more. And so as they've been needed, for example, as the injuries have come, Riley McGree dropping out with injury, for example, Sam Greenwood was able to slot in because he had that bit of extra time to, come off the bench a few times, get a feel for it, build his sharpness, grow those connections, so that when he was needed to start, he was more ready, essentially. I know he wasn't one of the players starting early on, but that's a good example of where, I think even back to last season, sorry to hark back again, but Cameron Archer, I think, was it 5 or 6 sub appearances he made where he didn't really do an awful lot in those early stages. And I always remember it was the defeat at Sunderland back in January, where he came off the bench that day and he looked quite sharp, and he looked, it was the most promising he'd given at that point in what was about his 5th or 6th appearance at that time. And it was the next game against Watford where he got his first start, and that was, that I remember that game. He was absolutely brilliant, pushing defenders off the ball and things like that. And I think at the start of this season, we didn't really see that in terms of that gradual integration into the team. It was a lot of kind of throwing these younger boys or boys with no championship experience straight into the team. And I appreciate they did have a pre-season. But pre-season friendlies are very different to the real thing, and obviously the championship is very different to what a lot of them have previously experienced in the football careers. So yeah, I think, as you say, we've started to pick things up now, haven't we? And things are looking a lot better. I know before the Leicester win, there was the defeat to Stoke, which for me, just with all the injuries, that was in midweek gone to Norwich and had to really grit the teeth and battle hard to kind of get over the line and get that win. And I think that ultimately just took its toll. Then on the Saturday against Stoke, they looked leggy, they looked tired, and they looked a bit battered and bruised. And ultimately weren't at the right levels. And then obviously last weekend the drew 3-3 with Plymouth, but it was a good performance in general. A couple of slack defensive moments and a controversial referee decision. You felt that you were coming away from Plymouth feeling that they'd done more than enough to have deserved the win. But then, thankfully yesterday, getting that big win against Leicester, changing the way they play to get the win. But nevertheless, it felt like a big win. And of course, you go into a 2-week international break in much better mood now. And when you've put in a performance like that against ultimately the team that have been the standout team in the championship this season, you've got to take huge belief from that. And coming back out of the international break, Bristol City away, isn't it, first? You've got to feel those players will be buzzing going into that game, and just feeling that, with the run of fixtures coming up, they could really start climbing that table and put another run together.
Absolutely, and I wanted to ask you about Kieran Scott. So obviously he joined the club just over 2 years ago now. So he's mentioned before about he's taken over the football operations at the club. From a transfer point of view, and from a business point of view, his job is very much about making sure that Middlesbrough are cutting their cloth accordingly, making sure that we're not overspending on players, and making sure that the club's sustainable for the future. So in terms of transfers, that means effectively, in a very simplistic way, signing players for as cheap as possible, signing young, hungry, talented players who you can develop, and they can either grow with the club or Middlesbrough can sell them on for a hefty profit and reinvest in the club, and so it continues. So from your point of view, obviously just over two years on from him joining the club, how big an impact would you say he's had in terms of Middlesbrough's transfer activity? And do you think it's an approach which is working for Middlesbrough at the moment?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because he's been here 2 years, but I would say really, I think he said it himself, didn't he? His job really only was able to properly start, after last October when they brought Michael Carrick in, because of course, there were well-known issues with when he first arrived, it was Neil Warnock, and Neil was never going to be the kind of manager who would work well in that kind of setup. Old school, he likes to have control, he likes to bring in his players, if you like. And then Chris Wilder come in, and a really strange one in the end, where Chris ultimately, we all knew by that point with Kieran Scott in charge what the direction of the club was. Chris ultimately decided he had alternative ideas of the direction he wanted Middlesbrough to go in. And, after that initial run where we just missed out on playoffs, he kind of, he had his own targets in mind for that summer transfer window, and the club wanted to go in a different direction, and ultimately relations soured, and bad start of that season. And in October, Michael Carrick arrives. And so really, I would say this summer's transfer window was the first summer transfer window really where Kieran Scott was able to properly implement what he wants. And I think, that's really clear in terms of, how the summer went ultimately. I think there'll always be that balance in terms of, I don't think You'll want to go down a route that Sunderland have, for example, where it's a complete focus on young, and every player that comes in is what you might consider a future asset. I think Michael Carrick's touched on this a bit as well in terms of the importance of leaders in the dressing room, the likes of your Tommy Smiths, the likes of your Darrell Lenahans and your Johnny Howsons. I think Middlesbrough will always be wary of making sure they've got those type of players. In an ideal world, they'll just progress up. So, for example, when Johnny Howson inevitably retires, they'll hope someone like Adil Fry, steps up and becomes a leader. As we mentioned, Darrell Lenahan still got a good few years in him yet. I think Tommy Smith's got another. I know he's out for this season, but I think he's got another year at the club, hasn't he? But over time, they'll hope players progress into those leadership roles from within the team. It won't always be a case of wanting to sell a player all the time. Naturally, particularly when the club remains in the Championship, they'll probably have to look to try and sell players just to bring in money. The finances are the finances. They're there to see. They're published every year in black and white. And I think over the last 4 years, the club have lost over £80 million. And, that's not a Middlesbrough problem. That's a Championship problem to try and stay competitive. Just about every Championship club is kind of, losing figures to that extent. And obviously Middlesbrough's aim is to be as competitive as they can, and ultimately is to get back to the Premier League. And Steve Gibson is trying to fund that as best as possible. But ultimately, there's a realisation within the club that kind of, signing assets and selling them on, bringing in 10 million this summer, for example, for Chuba Akpom, bringing in 20 million, and I think was it 12.5 for Tav the summer before that. That you're starting to recoup your losses there, and then reinvest those back in the team, because of course with Championship profit and sustainability rules, you can only lose so much money. So if you're losing all that money and not recouping your losses through selling players, revenue, where's that revenue coming from to ultimately leave you with money to buy players? So, those profit and sustainability rules will only allow an owner to put in, I think it's 20 million a year towards it. And as we say, when you're losing over 20 million a year, it's not leaving you a much kind of leeway to bring in the players you want. So obviously there has to be that focus now on those kind of players and on player trading. Obviously, you look at the examples you hold up all the time with this kind of model are your Brightons and your Brentfords, and you see the success they've had when you get this right. Both of those clubs have sold many big players over the years, but they've always had that continuation plan. And they've always managed to replace players that they've ultimately sold, and that's the position that ultimately Middlesbrough want to get themselves in, but they've had to do a bit of foundation building to get there. And I think that's what we saw this summer. In an ideal world, you wouldn't want to be signing 12 of those kind of players in one go. And you'd want to kind of in an ideal world, you'd want to have it where if, for example, I don't know, Hayden Hackney, who is probably one of Middlesbrough's most sellable assets at the minute, if he moved on, you'd want it where his replacement is probably already at the club or has been at the club about 6 months. So, if God forbid that were to happen now, maybe a Dan Barlasser could just step up and take that role in the team, and then you'd look to sign, a backup to Dan Barlasser or an asset who could develop to become, the next player behind Dan Barlasser. And you have that kind of production line, if you like. That's the ideal way to do it. That's the way the likes of Brentford and Brighton prefer to do it. They don't like to kind of sell a player and go out and sign his direct replacement if they can avoid doing it. They like to have them already in place, and that takes some foundations, that takes some building. I think it needs everybody at a club in tune, and I think that's what they've got now with Michael Carrick. They've got a fantastic young coaching team with Carrick, Woodgate, Dan Sledbitter, who enjoy working with players on the grass. You can see when you talk to Michael Carrick, he's probably at his most animated when he talks about players developing and coaching players, that's what he loves to do. He loves to be out on the grass, and that's what makes him the perfect fit for Middlesbrough right now. Is, you know, he's not going to be like Chris Wilder was, kind of constantly striving for, you know, a better caliber of players, constantly wanting more. He's going to be working with the players at his disposal to make them better. You know, don't get me wrong, Carrick is obviously very ambitious, and he'll always talk about wanting to involve the squad and wanting to, you know, improve as much as possibly can. But he's very understanding of the situation. He's very in tune with the model and the way the club want to go. And as I say, I mean, you look at, you know, his mannerisms in the early parts of this season when things weren't going so well. Even when the transfer window was still open, there was never any sign of Michael Carrick, you know, suggesting that he needed more or he needed better. It was always, we're getting better and we'll get better, I believe, in these players. And that's ultimately the kind of character that Michael Carrick is, and what makes him perfect for Boro right now.
And I wanted to ask about one player in particular who was very much the star of the show at the moment in Sam Greenwood. Obviously, you were at the Leicester match when he pinged that free kick into the top corner, which was just absolutely outstanding. I can't remember the last time I saw a Middlesbrough goal of that quality at the Riverside Stadium. It was just absolutely brilliant. And obviously, from a Middlesbrough point of view, we've signed him on a season-long loan from Leeds United. It's reported in The Athletic that Middlesbrough holds an option to sign him for £1.5 million on a permanent deal next summer. That has got to be the bargain of the century, hasn't it, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to believe that Leeds United have allowed that. I mean, I think 1.5 is what they signed him from Arsenal for. So, you know, for whatever reason, they're, you know, kind of thinking, right, well, we're cutting our cloth with that. We're breaking even. But yeah, it shocks me because everything we're seeing and hearing about him is that, you know, he's a really hungry young player. And, you know, you'd maybe, with something like that, you'd think, oh, well, you know, are there other problems? Because clearly the quality's there. You know, are the problems with his personality or something like that? But everything we're hearing right now are of a player who is so determined, so hungry. You know, he's spoken himself about, you know, when training finishes at Rockcliffe, the group training, he'll stay out on the pitch and do some extra work on his free kicks, on his finishing. He's been talking a lot lately about how he knows he needs to be more clinical. So he's doing extra work on his finishing and things like that. He's such a hungry young player in terms of wanting to grow, wanting to develop, which is exactly the kind of characteristic and you know, attitude that Michael Carrick and Middlesbrough ultimately love. They want these young players who are hungry to learn, hungry to play, hungry to do well. Yeah, and it just seems a no-brainer for me at this moment. I mean, you know, we've got a long way to go. There's absolutely no need to kind of rush into making a decision on that purchase option. But for me at the minute, if he continues in this vein and you know, continues playing in the manner he is, it's a no-brainer 1.5, because you would think if he continues growing at the level he is, he'd be worth a lot more than 1.5 million in a few years' time.
Definitely. And obviously, we have spoken a little bit about the summer transfer window in a few of my previous videos. I've spoken about the summer transfer business that we've sort of done, but lo and behold, we're in mid-November, and all of a sudden attention starts turning towards the January transfer window, which is absolutely mind-boggling because I don't know about you, but the last couple of months just seem like they've absolutely flown by. So from Middlesbrough's point of view, obviously the hope is that we'll continue to progress and we'll kind of be up and around that playoff picture come the new year. But from your point of view, Craig, what business do you think Middlesbrough will be looking to do in the January transfer window?
It's an interesting one for me. I'm honestly at the moment not 100% sure, and part of me wonders if a lot of it will, you know, kind of be determined by what happens between now and then. I think there's a clear strategy at the club now in terms of, you know, as we've spoken about, looking more at the building those assets, but there's always that Middlesbrough, particularly with Steve Gibson, that burning desire to get back to the Premier League. And I think if Middlesbrough is still in that picture come January, which, we touch wood, I'd expect them to be. How ambitious do they go in January? We've spoken about the use of the loan market last season, and wanting to kind of move away from that. And they have largely, obviously, 2 loan players this season. But as we've spoken about with Sam Greenwood, one of them, there's a purchase option there, so there's a longer term future there if it all works out. Part of me wonders. I mean, the obvious position in the squad, we all know it's no secret they wanted another striker in the summer. Absolutely no secret about that. Josh Coburn ultimately stayed because in the last few weeks of the window, they assessed what was ultimately out there, what was available at the prices they were able to pay, and ultimately they decided that there was nothing out there for what they could afford that was any better than Josh Coburn. So it suited them to keep Josh Coburn. Now, I don't think it's any secret either. Josh admitted himself he's still in contact with the Plymouth boss, Stephen Schumacher. I'd be very surprised if come January, Middlesbrough said Josh is available again. If he didn't jump at that opportunity, you could tell speaking to him last weekend at Plymouth that he really, really rates Josh. He really likes Josh as well as a boy. So it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if that loan move is still potentially on the table. Josh is obviously doing really well at the moment, starting for Middlesbrough, leading the line really, really well. But it wouldn't surprise me if the right kind of Premier League loan move, a Cameron Archer-esque loan move, was available to Middlesbrough in January. And as I say, there was still that possibility that, a push for the playoffs, or potentially, it looks a bit fanciful still at the moment, but you never know in the Championship. The Championship's crazy. If top 2 even was still on, that could be something I'd potentially see Middlesbrough doing. Kind of bringing in a Premier League loan striker of the ilk of Cameron Archer and loaning out Josh Coburn instead. It'd probably be harsh, but I think there's that Middlesbrough, to say, have always got that balance of kind of wanting to have this kind of future planning and future proofing and growing and thinking further forward, but they always still have that ambition to want to get back to the Premier League. And I think, as well as Josh is doing now, if they could bring in a striker like Cameron Archer last season, who'll come in and score 10 to 15 goals between January and the end of the season, that would massively boost their chances of making the playoffs and potentially getting promoted back to the Premier League. So it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if that is something Middlesbrough are considering right now.
And in terms of other outgoings, obviously Hayden Hackney has been one of Middlesbrough's best players this season, or to be honest, during this calendar year since he got brought back into the team under Michael Carrick. Now he's playing regularly with England under-21, so he's mixing with the likes of players, people like Cole Palmer, who are playing regularly at Chelsea, playing with a lot of players who are playing regularly in the Premier League. It seems like he's a player who is destined to get there at some point in the future. Frankly, whether it's with Middlesbrough or elsewhere, you never know. But is that something that Middlesbrough fans should be watching out for in January? Do you think there's a potential that someone in the top flight could come knocking for someone like Hayden Hackney?
I think there's always a potential with someone like Hayden Hackney, isn't he? Because he's such a good player, isn't he? He's proper Rolls Royce of a midfielder. I love watching him. For his age, the kind of maturity he has, and the way that he's always so happy to show for the ball and want the ball no matter the situation. Even yesterday against Leicester, he was guilty once or twice of giving the ball away in kind of dangerous areas, but it didn't stop him 1 minute later going and looking for the ball in a similar kind of area. And obviously working under Michael Carrick, a fantastic midfielder in his own day, you can just see his game growing week on week. He's such a brilliant player. So there's always that potential, I think, that Premier League clubs are going to be aware of Hayden Hackney. I think Middlesbrough are in a strong position there. Don't get me wrong, if in January somebody came and give them a silly offer for Hayden Hackney, they'd ultimately, we've spoken about the finances, they'd be in a position where they'd have to accept. But I think, when we talk about that trading model, I think Middlesbrough would prefer to do that in summer transfer windows. It's always much easier to kind of buy in the summer transfer window as well. I think Hayden Hackney for a Premier League club would be a kind of summer signing as well. Like January is always a window where you look at largely you look at the kind of repair holes in your squad. You look at to fix things that perhaps haven't gone quite so well in the first half of the season. So, for example, when Middlesbrough talked about the lone striker, it's no secret that neither Coburn or Latif have ultimately been scoring goals. So if they could get a striker who was, that would fix something for Middlesbrough. And I think that's usually what January more is. Whereas I think for Premier League clubs, Hayden Hackney would be more, the kind of future player. I mean, there'd be some teams who'd probably put him straight in, but for others, he'd be, not a development signing, but like a backup midfielder, maybe with the future in mind. And they tend not to be the ones that you'd go and splash big money on in a January window. So it would be a surprise to me if that happened in January. I think it would be if it did happen. I think it would be more likely to be a summer transfer, that one. And I think, the good position that Middlesbrough have got themselves in is if he signed a long-term contract in the summer. He obviously loves playing for Middlesbrough. Back in the summer, he had absolutely no thoughts of leaving the club whatsoever. He just wanted to be here. And I think Michael Carrick's a big factor in that, because for a young midfielder of his age, still developing, still growing, you look and you think, why would you want to be anywhere else but being coached by Michael Carrick at the minute at your hometown club? So there's always that risk that somebody would come and throw daft money at it. But in a January transfer window, it feels a lot less likely to me.
I also wanted to ask you about Paddy McNair, because he's someone who is, as I understand it, he's in the final year of his contract. He's one of the highest earners on Middlesbrough's books, possibly him and Johnny Howson as the two highest earners, both of whom are out of contract at the end of the season, as Johnny Howson is signing these 12-month sort of like rolling kind of agreements, I guess. But in terms of Paddy McNair, he started the season, he didn't seem like he was he didn't look like he was going to be a regular first team player. Obviously, Lenihan's been struggling with injury lately, so McNair's come back in. But do you think that's something where there could be some movement in January? Is it the sort of deal where Middlesbrough could look to offload him to recoup some sort of transfer fee if they are potentially looking at the prospect of him leaving for nothing next summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one that you would keep an eye on in January. I think we saw similar last January, didn't we, with Duncan Watmore? He was in a similar situation where he was ultimately going to leave the club on a free in the summer, and they managed to get some money from Millwall and on amicable terms and with great thanks to his service, they let Duncan go in January. And I think the same could happen with Paddy McNair. As you say, he's one of the highest earners at the club, certainly, and on the terms that he's currently on, I can't I can't see a new contract coming for him. I don't think Middlesbrough would want to, offer him a contract of that level. It's such an interesting one because, of course, he's come back to prominence, and the fact that he is able to play so many positions makes him an important player in some respects. And in Darragh Lenihan's absence, he stepped up and he was brilliant again yesterday against Leicester. So it's harsh, and it's in no way a kind of a knock on his ability as a player. But I think from Middlesbrough's point of view, I think it could be the right time. Obviously, Rav Vandenberg's come in, and he's been playing a lot at right back lately with Tommy Smith out for the season. But Carrick's spoken of the fact that eventually he would like to move him back to centre back and get him more game time there. You've got Matt Clark coming back as well. If he can kind of get himself back into the mix by that point, it'll ease Middlesbrough's kind of worry with that if they can find a buy for Paddy McNair. Because I think, as you see, ultimately similar to Duncan Watmore, if there's the chance in January to get a little bit of money from Paddy McNair, it's ultimately an option you've got to take up, rather than lose him for free. But I think also you've got to consider that, as we said, Rav Vandenberg would be there as cover, but he's been playing a lot of right back. Obviously, Anthony Tykesdale's there. He's coming back from injury. He had a very good game at Exeter a couple of weeks ago. So you've got one right back there, but you probably wouldn't want to go the rest of the season with just Tykesdale. So, if you're looking to sell McNair, you are surely as well looking to either bring in another centre back, depending on, Matt Clark probably, or you're looking to bring in another right back so that Rav Vandenberg can transition back to centre back. So that it's an interesting one in terms of how Middlesbrough deal with that one if an offer comes in, because it feels like one where they can't really, or they shouldn't really want to turn down an offer for him. Because ultimately you'll probably lose him for nothing if you don't 6 months down the line. But, again, thinking of that ambition to get back to the Premier League, we're not quite sure how serious Darragh Lenihan's injury is, but it is going to be a bit longer. Carrick hasn't given an exact, but he said Riley McGree's closest to returning. He's still a number of weeks away. So it's that worry of if you let Paddy McNair go and don't bring anyone else in, are you leaving yourself short at the back? So it's an interesting dilemma for them.
Definitely. I think the January transfer window is going to be a really interesting one for Middlesbrough this season. As you said, there's a lot of considerations in terms of injuries, but also in terms of where Middlesbrough are in terms of a promotion battle and a potential playoff push. And one final question for you, Craig. It's quite a big one. So in terms of where Middlesbrough are at the moment, obviously we've had the summer transfer window. I personally loved watching Middlesbrough last season with Chuba Akpom and Cameron Archer and Ryan Giles. It was probably the most entertaining and almost the most complete Middlesbrough team that I remember seeing in recent years. So from your point of view, how does this Middlesbrough team compare to last season's? And do you think that we're in a position to go one step further and ultimately secure promotion this time around?
Yes, I think, as I touched on earlier, I think in terms of, complete firepower, like ready-made firepower now. I think last season's Middlesbrough team were stronger. Certainly the regular 11 that started. We spoke Aaron Ramsey, Cameron Archer, Ryan Giles. I think that was a stronger starting 11. But I think where that side fell short is it lacked the depth. And ultimately when a lot of effort that it took to get them into the playoffs took its toll towards the end. Injuries took its toll. I think Aaron Ramsey was a huge miss in those playoffs against Coventry when they needed someone who could do a little bit something different to break a defence like Coventry down. Not having Aaron Ramsey was really felt, I thought. This season, I think, as we've discussed, there's a lot more kind of potential there than it is ready-made. So there will be weeks where they're not quite at the best, like the Stoke game, for example, where it just doesn't quite come off for them. But then you'll have days like yesterday where Sam Greenwood pings a free kick like he does into the top corner and you get the win. Yeah, I think they're coming together really nicely. They're gelling really nicely. And I think, they've got a lot more depth than they had last season. So as you see, I mean, to get the results that they've got in the last month or so, going on that six league game winning run, was it? When considering that they didn't have Lenihan, they didn't have McGree, they didn't have Marcus Force, who got 10 goals last season. There was a lot of quality missing to go on the kind of winning run that they did, which is testament to the strength in the squad. And I think because of the nature of the players that they are, players coming in from abroad who are still learning the league, young players who are still growing and developing, and I think they're only going to get better, which is the encouraging thing. Whether or not they're going to have enough to kind of go one better than last season, I'm not convinced on that yet. As I say, who knows what January brings if they could get a striker who, like Cameron Archer, banged in, between 10 and 15 goals, it could make a huge difference. It could be the big difference for this team if they can get some better luck with injuries, get players back. I look now, and it's probably harsh on Matt Crooks, who's been playing really well of late, but if they were to get Riley McGree back, and you could see a forward three behind the main striker of either Marcus Force or Isaiah Jones, and then Greenwood and Riley McGree, one on the left, one at 10. That looks a really exciting forward line to me, with a lot of kind of craft, a lot of invention, a lot of unpredictability that would worry almost any championship defence. There's certainly a lot of positive signs there in terms of Middlesbrough being able to consistently go on a run and win a lot of matches, which should put them in, a good kind of footing to hopefully make those playoffs. It's so tight this year, isn't it? I was looking at the table again after last night's win, and you look in, and I think it was as far down as about 14th, 15th, maybe. You're right in the mix in terms of those playoff places. I think Leicester and Ipswich have had a really good start where they've almost not pulled away. I don't think by any, certainly from what we saw of Leicester yesterday, I don't think there's the prospect of either of them potentially doing what Burnley did last season, but they look quite comfortable at the moment, and it would be a stretch, I think, for Middlesbrough to catch those. But those top six, 4 to 6, third to 6 it's wide open, and there's just so many clubs within that race who could get that. It's going to be really tight. It's going to be one of those, I think, a bit like the Chris Wilder season where you're going down to the final game and there's still maybe 4 or 5 teams who could nick one of those playoff places. And I hope Middlesbrough have got enough. I do just worry that they are a bit more kind of built for the future than the right now, and whether that over time kind of inconsistency that you can get with younger players takes its toll, and they maybe drop a few points that they shouldn't or they can't afford to, and it ultimately just leaves them a little short. But I obviously hope I'm very wrong with that.
Well, time will tell. It's a long season, and as you said, a lot can change over the coming months. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But thank you so much for your time today, Craig. It's really interesting to pick your brains on all things Middlesbrough and what's going on at the moment. And of course, we'd love to have you back at some point in the future. I know that December's going to be absolutely mad with fixtures crammed in everywhere in the schedule. But it'll be great to have you back if you were up for it.
Yeah, anytime, Phil. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Brilliant. And thank you all for watching. And I'll catch up with you next time.